everyone, welcome to the next part of the video series. This time we're going to start creating objects such as coins, hearts, checkpoints, and obstacles that your player may interact with on their journey. But before we jump into that, let's go back and look at the revised code. As you can see, I pulled out a couple variables. Capsule height and radius are now here. Water tag is a value here instead of being written here. We do this so that it's not hard-coded and you can easily change it from the variables on top instead of having to search for it. If, for example, I decided that I no longer want to call it water tag, I would have to go to these two places and manually change it. Meanwhile, right here makes it much easier to change everything at once. Next, with our jumping, the collider is large enough that if you are standing next to a wall, you can still spam jumping. To solve that, we're going to change the height of the capsule from 1 to 0.25, and that prevents the infinite jump. Alright, let's actually get started on the next section of the game. First, we're going to tackle dealing with obstacles. Right now, if you run into these spikes, nothing will happen. They are just triggerable elements, and we have no code to trigger them. Let's create a new script, and we're going to call it player stats. This is going to keep track of the player coin count, player health, and player respawn position. Player stats. Let's open it up. First thing we're going to do is tackle the respawning. Currently, there is no way to respawn and get damaged, so let's create a public transform, and we're going to call it respawn point. This is where the player will come back to when they die. Next, let's create a method we are a bit familiar with, onEnter. On trigger enter 2D. In this method, we're going to have a lot of collisions with different objects, and we will want to switch between different actions. So what we're going to do is we're going to extract the tag from it. So we're going to go string collision tag, and we're going to equal it to the collision tag. Next, we're going to use a switch statement. Switch statement works very similarly to an if statement, except it just checks against this. So instead of doing if this, if that, it does all of this within here by doing cases. What is going to be case first? We're going to create a private string that's going to be the death tag, and it's going to be called death. So in the case that our player touches something that is tagged with death, they will die and respawn at the position. So the case is death tag. We're going to do this, and we're going to have a return statement afterwards. Right now, you can see that it's complaining about something. It's saying that it needs to be a constant value. That means it cannot be changed throughout its lifetime. So we'll add a const modifier to this variable. And this way, it doesn't matter what happens during the game. This variable will always say death. Now, what we want to do here is we want to take our player character. We want to stop all movements, and we want to place them where the respawn position exists. So to do that, we are gonna once again get our rigid body 2D. We're gonna get the component of it, and with that, we're gonna set the velocity to be 0. Vector 2.0. So this will make sure that if the player touches something that kills them, they stop immediately. Next, we want to make sure that the player is moved to where the respawn point is. So what we're going to do is we're going to do transform that position equals respawn point that position. This will copy whatever the position of the respawn point is and paste it into our player, and that's where they get teleported to. Now, let's go back to our Unity and implement this in here. First, let's drag our new script into the inspector. And as it says here, we need a transform. The respawn point will be an independent object of the player. If we were to attach the respawn point to the player, it would just follow them around and would respawn into the death. So we're going to create a new object. We're gonna call it respawn point, or just respawn, and we can zero it out for now. Let's give it a marker so we can always find it easily. And let's connect it. Before we can test it, we have one more step. We have to make an obstacle. Right here we have our spikes. There is no death tag yet, so we're going to click add tag and we're going to create death. And we're going to save it. We go back to our spikes, place the death tag on it, and now we can try out our respawn. There you go. The player got teleported back to the respawn point immediately upon touching the spikes. What's the next step we can take? Well, we want to give our player hearts. We want them to have lives. Currently, the player can die, but that doesn't really affect anything. To give the death some meaning, let's give the player some life. So let's create a variable. It's going to be an integer because life is always 1, 2, 3. We're not going to have half lives. Let's do player life, and let's give the player 3 life. Now, when the player hits an object that will damage them, we can take away 1 life for each time they do that. Let's make it public for now so we can view it in the inspector before we create any UI referencing it. And let's view our game. Clicking on the player, we can now see that we have 3 life points. And we can go into our happy little death. And we lost 1 life. Now how do we regain it? Let's create an object that will allow us to do that. So we're going to create a brand new object and we're going to call it heart. Let's zero this object out as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to give this object a sprite so the player can view it during the game. Let's go to our sprites folder. Let's go to our sprite sheet. Let's open up the big sprite sheet we cut up. And in here we have a heart. Let's look at our heart. Let's drag the sprite sheet here. And now we have an object with that sprite sheet. Let's call it sprite. Now what we need to do is give this object a box collider or any kind of 2D collider that you'd like. Let's zoom in on it so we can look at it a little bit better. The box collider is a bit generous, so we can shrink it down a little bit to fit the object much better. And we're gonna create a new tag. We're gonna call this health. And make sure you attach it. And now we can go back to our script. We can create a second tag variable. And we can call it health tag. And we can create a second case. Our new case is going to be called health tag, as we said before. And this time, all it's going to do is increase the player life by 1. Alright, let's save it and test it. We forgot to do one thing. We need to make sure that the box collider is set to be triggerable. The player is touching it. As you can see, they are gaining health each time they touch it, but the heart is not disappearing. We don't really want to do that. What we do want to do is make sure that the heart is gone after the player used it so that they can't infinitely farm it. Let's go back to our code and make that happen. To do this, we can actually use a special method called destroy. So we're going to say destroy, and then we're going to say collision, that game object. We don't want to destroy the collision component, we want to destroy the whole object. So this will destroy a heart when it happens. Let's test it out one more time. And there you go. This time around, the player has gained a health and the heart has disappeared. And now if we go back and die, we're back to where we started. Let's say you want to create the heart again. Creating multiple hearts would be difficult to track of if every single one of them had to be manually adjusted. So what you want to do is you want to create a prefab, which is a template of that object that you can bring out from your assets folder and instantiate a new version of it. To do that, let's go into our prefabs folder. We can click on the heart and we can drag it into our prefabs folder. You will notice that the heart turned blue. That means it is a prefab. And in here, if we double click on it, it will be placed in the prefab editor. That lets you just edit this prefab and it alone. So any changes you do here will be reflected in this heart and any other heart that's placed in the map. So for example, later on we'll be adding sound effects and animations to our objects. Instead of having to go through every single heart and adding the sound effects and animations to them, we'll be able to simply go in here, add it here, and it will be populated across all its copies in the game. Now, for current situation, what we can do is we can just grab it and pull it out, and now you have two hearts in your game. And you can do this as many times as you'd like. What could be another thing that we want to do? To lead the player in directions we want and create rewards for exploring, we can create some coins for the player to collect. This can be simply done by copying a heart. We can actually go in here, right click on it, look at the prefabs, and we can unpack it. This means it's no longer connected to that original prefab, and we can edit it to our heart's content. So let's unpack it completely. You will notice that it's grayed out now. We're going to rename this to be called coin. And similarly, we're going to change the tag and create a new one called coin. Make sure it's actually attached. Let's place it at the 0, 0 position. And let's change the sprite. Let's go back to our sprite sheet and look for a coin. Right here, perfect. So let's change our sprite to the coin. And let's do one more thing. Let's make this coin a prefab as well. So now you have multiple objects you can copy and paste into your game. Let's place a couple coins in our level. This will incentivize the player to go in these new locations. Now we're not fully done yet. We still have to go back to the script and edit it there. We're going to first start by creating another tag that we can edit. We're going to have it called coin tag. I'm going to call it coin. And then likewise, we're going to create a new variable that's going to keep track of how many coins the player has. Player coin equals 0. And what we're going to do is create another case. We're going to do a coin tag. And we're going to increase the player coin count. And likewise, we're going to destroy the coin afterwards so the player can't just keep collecting it. Let's go back to our game and test it out. Alright, so we can collect our heart. Let's look at the player so we can view it in the inspector. The player's collecting the coins. The coins are disappearing. Everything is right with the game. We will create two more objects. One, let's create an end of the game object. That way when the player reaches the end of the level, they can be sent to the next level. And let's create a respawn checkpoint. Let's start with the checkpoint. Let's create a new object. Like before, we can just copy our coin. We can unpack it so it's no longer connected to the prefab. And let's rename it to be called checkpoint. Let's move it somewhere where we can view it. And let's edit the sprite to fit what we'd like. In this situation, our flag is split into 2 points. So what we can do is we can create a second sprite where we can name them lower, upper. Let's set the upper to look like the top of the flag and the lower set as the bottom of the flag. And then let's move the position by -1. So now our checkpoint is quite large, but the collider isn't. So what we want to do is expand the collider, make it a bit bigger so it's generous. And we want to create a new tag for it. We're going to call it respawn, and we're gonna save it, and we're gonna attach it to our respawn. Let's place it at 0, 0, so that our prefab is always at 0, 0. And then let's move it around in our level. Let's place it right here past the spikes. Now let's go back into our script and update it there. Let's create a new respawn tag. Respawn. Respawn. We're going to create a new case. We're going to call it respawn. And now we're going to do something slightly different. First, we don't want to destroy it, and we don't want to increase any counters. What we want to do is we want to copy the placement of the object. Now, looking at our script, the placement could be anywhere of this object. So let's create one more empty object in here, and it's going to be the point. This will be the respawn point. Let's give it a dot. So right here is where the player would respawn. Let's place it around here, -1, so that anytime player dies, they will respawn at this point exactly. As you can see, the point is not part of the prefab. It's grayed out, but it has this little plus button. That means that if I create another object, it will now have that point. Let's open it up. That's because we edited this individual one. But what we can do is we can go to our checkpoint, and you see this overrides. This tells you everything we changed in this scene, and we can either revert it or apply it, and it will get sent back to the parent. So let's click apply. And now if I create a new one, it comes with a point as well. Now what we're gonna do in here is we're gonna take that collision, and then we're gonna get the game object, and then we're gonna get the transform, and we're gonna find the child that has the text point in it. Like before, we should make this a variable so it's not hard-coded. Private const string respawn collision point. So we have this. We've basically what we're saying here is we're looking at the object we collided with, looking at its transform, and looking through its children for an object that has the name point. And then what we want to do is look at its transform and copy it into our respawn transform. So what we're going to do is do respawn, and we're going to make them equal. And then in this situation, our respawn point will move to the location of the respawn checkpoint we found, and we will always respawn from there when we die. Let's test this out. So as you can see, our respawn point is right there. We're going to move to our checkpoint, and then we're going to die. And as you can see, we pop back up here instead of where we did before. And lastly, we're going to create an object that allows us to leave the level and go to the next one. To do this, I want to do something a bit more fancy and show you guys that you can mix 3D and 2D game elements together. So what we're going to do is we're going to, like before, copy a coin, and we're going to unpack it. Let's put it in the center like before so we can work with it. Let's call it end level. But this time, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the sprite. What we're going to do is we're going to create a cube. So now we have a cube in our level. What we want to do, we can look at it a bit closer. We can see that we have a box collider on it. We want to expand the box collider like before to fit it. Now, because the object is 3D, that doesn't mean we can't treat it like a 2D object. So right now you can see that it's a 3D object on our 2D plane with a 2D box collider. We will use the 2D box collider, and regardless of the actual asset that's connected to it, it will behave as a 2D object that we want. Let's Let's go back to our 2D space. We're going to change this to be called finish. And now when the player walks into this, they will finish the level. Right now it may not look that impressive, but later with animations we're going to make it spin and it'll be a very cool end of the level object. What we're also going to do is very quickly look at the 3D object material. In the materials folder we have a material. Right here you can control different aspects of the way the material will show up. So right now, let's look at our cube. We're gonna give this material the victory material we have set here, and we can change its color. As you can see, it's not a solid color. That's because there's a light hitting it, and the gradient is controlled by the lighting system that is the directional light. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep this white. However, what we're gonna do is create an albedo for it. Albedo is basically a picture that you're gonna place on top of it. Let's go to our textures, and I have a single image of a box. Here you will see that the texture type is default. It's not a sprite or UI. Default is for 3D objects, and we're going to use it for 2D shape. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our material. We're going to lock it in here, go to our texture, and drag the box into the albedo. As you can see, now the object is using that image, and you can see a preview of it here as well. Views, right here is a box. This is what it looks like in general space. Now what we can do, let's look at this texture, and we can change the filter mode to be point, so it is crisper just like everything else. Now in here you can control the shininess of it using the smoothness and metallicness. Play around with it the best way you want. Let's have it reflect some of the light. At some point we're going to be turning it around. It'll look much nicer. Now that our end object is complete, we can create a prefab of it as well. And let's place it at the other side of the level. Lastly, we need to go back to our script and create functionality for it. So let's create another case. And in this situation, we're gonna have one more tag called finish. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna have finish, and we're gonna use a new library, Unity engine, that scene management. And this will allow us to switch between different scenes. So when the player goes in here, we can do scene manager, that load scene, and then we can have a public variable. It's going to be a string, and it's going to be next level equals level 2. Next level. So whenever player walks into this object, Unity will look for a level called next, whatever we called it, level 2 in this case, and try to load that. While we're in here, we can also use this ability to finish our life system. Since the player currently just loses life infinitely and there is nothing to stop them, we can update to reload the level if the player loses. So what we can do is we can have a check. So we can check if player life is equal or less than 0. We're gonna get the scene name. So string scene name equals scene manager dot active scene dot name. This will get us the name of the scene we're currently in, and we can copy and paste this bit, and it's going to reload us into the scene we are. The second the player loses their last life, the game basically reloads to a fresh scene. Let's test it all out. So let's test out the death mechanic. Let's give the player 1 health, And then when we walk into the spikes, as you can see, the game reloaded and that coin is back. Now, for the scene transition, we need to have a second scene. So let's open up our scenes. So what we can do is Control C, Control V to copy it, and let's rename it to what we called it in the editor, level_2. Let's go inside of it. You can tell which scene we are in by the name here. And let's change the background so the color is a bit different so we know that we switched scenes. Now, this won't immediately work because the scene is not attached in the Unity files. So what we have to do is go to File, Build and Setting, and Add Open Scene. Once the scene is inside the Scenes in Build, you'll be able to jump between them. Let's go back to our test level. Let's save the changes here and test it out. Let's walk in, and boom, we're in a new level as indicated by the red background. There is one problem. If we walk into here, it will keep loading us into the second level. That's because the next level is determined by the player and not by the object. So we're gonna have to give this end level object its own script that we can interact with. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create one more script. We're gonna call it end level. Let's open it up. We're not gonna need any of this. All it's gonna do is have a public variable inside of it. It's gonna be a string called next level. And we can put level_2 as a basis. We can save it. We can go back to our player stats and we can remove it from our player. Now this will give us an error that we're missing a variable, but we're gonna get that variable now. We're gonna do string next level is equal to collision dot get component, and the component is gonna be end level. And from here we're gonna pull the next level variable. So let's see how this works in the game. We're gonna go to our end level object and we're gonna attach our script. The script will, on basis, will go to level 2. Let's make sure that we overwrite it and all copies will have this ability. And then let's go back to our scene level 2. We want to change the saves. As you can see, this object also has this ability, but we don't want to go to level 2. We want to go back to test level. So we can type in test level here, save that and go back to our test level. And now we can go between the levels. And if you have more levels, you can follow this setup to create as many levels as you'd like. That should conclude our objects for the time being. Next steps we're going to take is implementing animation in our game.